Course 4, Neuromotor Function and Social Cognition. This is the Week 1 mini lecture for overview of neuromotor function. So we begin with this quote to orient us to the content for this week and to help us start to really think about how neuromotor function can operate in the classroom in those obvious and not so obvious ways. The quote reads, "He was no student, and he had the added handicap of being left-handed in a right-handed world. His first grade teacher made him write with his right hand. He never became proficient at it, and he put much of the onus for his lackadaisical work in school on his inability to write swiftly and smoothly. Anything you can't do well and don't enjoy, you generally fall behind in," he observed. So to get us started getting in the frame of mind to think about what school is like for students who have a struggle with neuromotor function, let's think about these questions. First, what does the italicized sentence say about the connection between neuromotor function and students' access to success in school? What have you noticed in your own experiences with students who struggle with handwriting? Are there any connections between what you're seeing in the quote, that last sentence, anything you can't do well and don't enjoy, you generally fall behind in? Do you see any connections between that and what you've seen in your own experience in the classroom? So for this week, we're just getting started and introducing the components and the parts of neuromotor function as they're designed and laid out in the neurodevelopmental framework. So first, in this set of slides, we'll just talk about a general definition for what is neuromotor function. And after that, we'll go through each of the small parts, the components of neuromotor function individually. And those components include gross motor function, fine motor function, graphomotor function, and oromotor function. So first, what is neuromotor function? Well, it's most simply defined as the brain's coordination of muscle movements. So when we start thinking about neuromotor function in terms of student learning, it's helpful to unpack the kinds of neuromotor function demands that are embedded in the typical activities and tasks students are offered and asked to participate in throughout the school day. So if you take a look at that picture in the bottom right corner, that's a very explicit and kind of straightforward way of thinking about neuromotor function. You can observe it in certain kinds of activities like this. So for example, playing with balls in a PE class, you can really see how students are able to navigate their bodies through space. However, it also operates to support or constrain participation in other kinds of activities, such as demonstrating concepts through motion, which is shown in that middle picture, or creating drawings or writing to respond to ideas, artifacts, or topics of study. These two pictures, the one in the middle and the one towards the left, place potentially high demands on students' neuromotor functioning, but the task itself is addressing different features of learning. So a student's strengths or challenges in neuromotor function may be at play when a student's learning and participation is constrained. So within the construct of neuromotor function, there are these four main components. And we're going to start with the gross motor function, which is that control of the large muscle movements. Gross motor function is involved in playing sports like running, jumping, and climbing. And for many students who have a strength or an affinity for gross motor activities, including opportunities for them for large muscle movement into learning tasks in the classroom might offer a welcome respite from traditional school-based or classroom activities. There's a video link on this page for a lesson called Over, Under, Around, and Through. And this lesson presents an example of ways to incorporate gross motor function to support students in engaging with the content in new ways, and which is intended in part to support their interest and their enjoyment at school through the use of physical movement. After you finish this mini lecture, you can go back on the Moodle page and download these slides. And when you go through them with slideshow, you'll be able to click on that link for Over, Under, Around, and Through and get directly to the lesson. When you're watching that lesson, these are some questions I encourage you to think about. The first is, how do you think a student with gross motor challenge would experience the activities? And how might that student respond to the lesson? Also, what activities, classes, or parts of the school day do you think place the most demands on students' gross motor skills? And what do you think school is like in general for students with gross motor weaknesses? Or what is it like for students with gross motor strengths? Next, we want to think about fine motor function. Fine motor function is defined as the control of hand movements and manual dexterity. I want to note here that within this neurodevelopmental framework that we're using in this course, fine motor function is presented as distinct from the task of writing, which we'll refer to as graphomotor function. Instead, fine motor function includes tasks at school like cutting, using small manipulatives, or creating models and projects to represent learning. As with gross motor function, for many students, these kinds of activities are a welcome shift away from the reading and writing tasks or discussion-based tasks that tend to dominate traditional classroom curricula. However, for students with fine motor weaknesses, these same tasks can raise new challenges for them in terms of their learning and their participation. The link on this page will take you to this Rube Goldberg contraptions lesson. As you watch this lesson, please think about these questions. What are the fine motor demands of the lesson? What activities, classes, or parts of the school day do you think place the most demands on students' fine motor skills? And what do you think school is really like for students with fine motor weaknesses? And what might it be like for students with fine motor strengths? Next, we're going to think about graphomotor function, which, as I mentioned on the last slide, is specifically about writing by hand. Now, obviously, graphomotor function is in high demand throughout much of the school day. Weaknesses with this component of neuromotor function really raise special and acute challenges for students for this reason. If the task of writing, which is extremely complex, it involves language, attention, higher order cognition, and memory, and graphomotor weaknesses complicate matters more for students by presenting difficulties with the physical aspects of writing, in addition to any challenges they may encounter related to those other construct areas. So after you watch this mini lesson, you go back and click on this Post-its lesson, little notes for big discussions. Take a look at that lesson and then think about graphomotor function in terms of the lesson. Here are the guiding questions. First, what are the graphomotor demands built into the lesson? Recall that this lesson has a learning objective of speaking and listening. Then think about how could a graphomotor weakness impact a student's participation in the posted activity? What activities, classes, or parts of the school day do you think place the most demands on students' graphomotor skills? And what do you think school is like for students with graphomotor weakness? Do you know any students that have graphomotor weakness? And if so, what has their experience of school been? And what do you think school might be like for students with a graphomotor strength? What kinds of tasks and activities would they have interest in and want to participate in, as opposed to their peers who may have more challenges? Finally, we're going to think about oromotor function. So oromotor function is the physical task of speaking. And once again, this physical demand of school-based tasks involving speech are really not always forefronted when designing lessons, but can present distinct and important challenges for students with weakness in oromotor function. And it's really about producing the sounds for language, not to be to remain distinct from the idea of expressive language from the language construct that you thought about a few months ago. This is more what you would think about in terms of speech and speech production. So when you watch Edwina's senior presentation video, please think about the questions on this page as you tune in to those oromotor demands of the task. Think about, how does Edwina's oromotor function support her presentation? How do you think this task would be for her if she had an oromotor weakness? What activities, classes, or parts of the school day do you think place the most demands on students' oromotor skills? And what do you think school is really like for those students with oromotor weaknesses and oromotor strengths? Are there other ways that a strength or a weakness in this motor function may be misinterpreted as a strength or a weakness across another construct? And finally, here are the assignments for this week. So you have these 4 pages from the Pullman book. This is posted on the Moodle site. You have a neuromotor function and school-based activities weekly assignment that is also posted on the Moodle page. Just so you know, the intention is for you to use that assignment to really think about neuromotor function and school-based activities. The writing demands I have placed on you, I'm hoping, are relatively small, but I encourage you to think deeply and not necessarily write too many words. So I believe I asked you to write just 1 to 2 sentences on a couple of different questions, and I really want you to use the energy that you're expending to participate in this course for thinking about your practice and what's most valuable for you, and I don't want you to spend too much energy producing prose for me in the course. I would far rather have the work be connected in a meaningful way for you in your work. And then finally, we have a discussion forum for this week. It is also posted on the Moodle site.